In today's video, I'm excited to show you how I made this dot painted keepsake box for Father's Day. I'm going to show you all the steps and materials so you can make one just like this for your dad. Grab all your stuff and let's get crafty.
This is Mary. Welcome to the IHC craft room. For materials, we'll begin with a wood box that I picked up at the dollar store, some blue felt, matte varnish, some chalk paint in black, some acrylic paint in spun gold, peacock blue, tropical blue, titanium white, and sour apple. For tools, we'll begin with dotting tools, of course, a stencil, a paint palette, a mini screwdriver, some painter's tape, scissors or a cutting tool, a paintbrush, some sandpaper, a glue gun, some toothpicks, Q-tips, and a wet rag. I'm going to start by using the tiniest screwdriver you ever did see to take all of the hardware off this box. And to make sure I don't lose anything, because I would not have anything this size to replace it with, I'm going to put all the pieces into a little Ziploc bag and put them aside for later. Next, I'm going to take some time to give this box a good sanding all over, because don't nobody want any splinters up in here. Thanks. Once that's done, I'm just going to wipe down the box and make sure there's no dust from the sanding left behind. And then I'll cover any sections of the box that I don't want to paint with painter's tape. I'm going to paint the full exterior of this box, but I want to keep the interior natural wood. And that includes the trim around the opening of the box and the underside as well. That's just my preference. You can paint the entire thing inside and out if you like. It's totally up to you. I'm going to give this a thin coat of paint, give it some time to dry, and then I'll do a second coat. But since this is chalk paint, you really don't have to. I'm just extra. Next, I'm going to cover the entire painted surface with 2 thin layers of matte varnish. This will protect my paint in the event that I make any mistakes and need to use my cotton-tipped angel friends, the Q-tips. Once that is fully dry, it's time to add guidelines using a chalk pencil and my favorite silicone stencil. Okay, the prep work is done. It's finally time to start dotting. Take a deep breath, let it out, and using the 12.0 rod and white paint, place your center dot. This paint is a little bit on the thick side, so I'm going to use my stylus to smooth it out because I am going to be adding some additional top dots to the center dot a little bit later. Now let's add a trim around this center dot using the 1mm blue stylus and some green sour apple paint. The trick here is to take your time and leave space between each dot so that they don't run into each other. Really, really take your time. For the first row, we're going to stick with the green color, but we're going to switch to the 3mm green stylus, and we're going to just make a nice row of green dots, making sure not to overcrowd them. I definitely want to see a lot of the black shining through this entire piece. Next, we're going to skip ahead to row 4. Using the 6.0 rod and white paint, I'll skip the next row on my guidelines and place a dot on the following row. And I'll start by using a cross-shaped pattern, and then I'll fill it in until ultimately there'll be a dot on every other line. For this row, we're going to be using the walk the dots technique to build out 3 layers of diminishing dots in different colors around these large white dots. Using tropical blue light blue paint and the top of any stylus so that it's a 1.25mm side, I'll start by placing a small dot at the tip of each white dot. Then using the 1mm blue stylus, I'll place 2 equal sized dots one by one before adding paint to my stylus one more time, and then dotting without stopping to refill my dotting tool with paint. This will cause the paint to dwindle out and make smaller and smaller dots until we end with a micro dot finish. Something to make note of here, especially if you're new to the walking the dots technique, is that when you filled your dotting tool with paint and begin the walking the dots movement, it's very easy to get super excited and start rushing. And that's the perfect way to mess it up and run all your dots together. So remember, as you've probably heard me say countless times at this point, take your sweet baby Jesus time, okay? Take your time. For the next layer, we'll be using our green paint and the same stylus we used for the previous layer, the 1mm blue stylus. And we're going to do the same thing here. Start off by placing one slightly larger dot with the 1.25mm side. Then flip the stylus over and using the 1mm side, I'll place 3 equal sized dots this time, before flipping my stylus again and walking the dots to a micro finish. For the third and final layer, we'll be using the same stylus tool once again and peacock blue paint. And this time we'll be placing 5 equal dots before walking the dots into a micro dot finish of nothingness. In between what we've just created, I'm going to be adding a tropical blue long skinny swipe using the 3mm green stylus and the smallest, skinniest stylus I have. I'm going to take that dot and drag it down to a very thin, teeny tiny pointed finish. The key to creating a pretty swipe is to always be patient, of course, but also to really regulate the amount of paint you're taking with your tool and dragging down. If you drag a lot of paint with you, there's no way you will get down to a thin, skinny finish. It's important to be really conservative with your paint. You can always drag a little bit more down later, but you can never undo it once you've already dragged too much paint. So be cautious. For the next part of our pattern, we'll be using the 2mm pink stylus and some sour apple paint to place a dot on either side of the blue swipe. We're going to place these green dots just below the top of the blue swipe and then drag them down to a tapered finish. I'm going to make sure that the green swipe butts right up against the blue swipe so that you don't see any of the black base coming through. So it's important to make sure that your blue swipe is fully dry before doing this, or you're going to end up mixing your colors together. We're going to jump back to row 3, and using white paint and the 4.0 rod, we'll be adding a white dot just beneath the swipes that we just completed. We're going to follow that up with some slightly smaller white dots in the spaces remaining using the 3mm green stylus. At this point, I'm not going to be needing my guidelines anymore, so once the paint is fully dry, using a damp Q-tip, I'm going to start erasing my guidelines. Just a little heads up, even though they are made of chalk and they do eventually come off, removing guidelines can be a lot more frustrating than it looks like in these videos. So persevere, my friend, it will come off eventually, don't worry. Now that our guidelines are gone, it's time to fill in row number 2 using Peacock blue and the 2.5mm white stylus to drop a dot, and then the 0.8mm yellow stylus to drag that paint down, adding some super small swipes that curve around the center of our mandala, making sure to leave a little gap in between each and continuing to moderate the amount of paint on our stylus as we create these little baby swipes. It's time to do some top dots. Using the 8.0 white rod and tropical blue paint, we're going to add a dot to the center dot. And then, using the 2mm pink stylus, we'll place a top dot on the smaller white dots in row 3. We'll follow that with some top dots using Peacock blue paint and the 3mm green stylus on the remaining white dots in the third row. Next, we'll use white rod 4.5 and Peacock blue paint to add a top dot to the fourth row, but this dot will position a little lower than center and give it a really pretty offset look. We're going to move on to some accent dots and spun gold using the 1mm blue stylus. I'm going to add 2 small dots in between each of the green dots in row 1, making sure not to touch any of those green dots. We'll follow that up with adding gold dots in a box shape around the larger white dots in the third row. Then we'll add some gold accent dots using the 3mm green stylus right above our walk the dots petal in the fourth row. And then we'll flip the stylus over and add a small gold dot above the swipes in row 4. Still using the gold paint, we'll switch to the 3mm green stylus and add a gold dot flanking either side of the base of our swipes. Now let's head back to our center dot, and using the 5.0 rod, we'll add a gold top dot. Once that's fully dry, we'll add one last top dot in Peacock blue using the 3.5 rod. And the very last step on this mandala will be to add some white paint to the sour apple to get a lighter green color. And then we'll add some top dots using the 2mm pink stylus to our green dots in row 1. Lastly, we'll add some top dots to the top of our sour apple swipes too. Before we have the hardware back on this keepsake box, I'm going to add one last little design to the front of the base of the box. After finding the center, I'll use tropical blue paint and the 3.5 rod to stack 2 dots one over the other right at the center point. Once they've dried a bit, I'll add a dot on either side using the 5.0 rod. And lastly, I'll use the 2.5mm white stylus to walk a trio of diminishing dots on either side of this pattern. We'll come back later and add some top dots, but for now, let's focus on adding the felts to the inside of the box. I'm going to trace out the bottom and then cut the felt to size. I spent way too much time on making this felt perfect before gluing it down carefully. Hopefully you won't waste that much time on yours. Kind of sounds like a bow fluffing issue, doesn't it? Anyway, let's not talk about it. You may have noticed that I wrote a little love message to my dad under the felt. What does it say? You'll never know. Tee-hee. Once the felt has been glued down, it's time to peel off the painter's tape and then add back on our hardware. It's a good thing that my original audio can be removed from the video, because the amount of swearing I did while trying to get these miniature screws in place with these epically large man hands of mine was pretty scandalous. I'm pretty sure I would have made some sailors blush. Wouldn't be the first time. All right, we are in the home stretch. Just 2 more sets of top dots on this bottom pattern before adding a couple of thin coats of varnish, and then this keepsake box will be done. Using white paint and the green 3mm stylus, we're going to add some white top dots to the base of the circle for an off-center look. Once that is very well dry, we'll come back and add a final top dot using Peacock blue paint and the 2mm pink stylus. At this point, you'd want to cover the entire project in varnish to make sure that it stays well protected. Okay, it's time for the reveal. What do you think? Came out pretty great, didn't it? I hope my dad likes it. Thank you for joining me on this splinter-free, blue felt injected, green, blue, white, and gold dot painted wood keepsake box making journey. Oxygen is good. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I'd love to chat with you in the comments, so say hi, okay? And don't forget to subscribe so that we can continue to get crafty together. Toodaloo!